For 67 years, the script was simple. The American president demands something. The Canadian prime minister complains, stalls, maybe asks for a polite favor, and then eventually they fold. They always fold, because they have to. Because when you sleep next to an elephant, you don't poke it. You just hope it doesn't roll over. But yesterday, the elephant rolled over. Donald Trump tried to corner Canada. He put a gun to the head of the Canadian economy. He demanded total submission on trade, on energy, on the border. He thought it was over before it started. But then something impossible happened. Mark Carney didn't blink. He didn't shout. Before we go deeper, if you want sharp geopolitical breakdowns that the mainstream won't touch, hit subscribe and drop a comment. Your engagement pushes this reporting to more people. He didn't go on social media and type in all caps. He simply refused. And that silence, that refusal, is currently deafening inside the White House. We are watching a shift in the global order happening in real time. You are watching the moment the United States realized that bullying only works if the other person is scared. And right now, Canada isn't scared. Canada is calculating. Over the next hour, I'm going to walk you through exactly what happened in the last 27 hours. I'm going to show you the receipts, the leaked documents, the trade numbers, and the panic spreading through American supply chains right now. Because while Trump is busy making noise, Carney is busy making history. And if you think this is just about milk or lumber or steel, you are missing the bigger picture. This is about who really holds the power in North America. And for the first time in a century, it might not be the person in the Oval Office. Buckle up. The rules just changed. Let's strip away the noise and look at the raw timeline. Because if you're only watching mainstream news, you're hearing about tensions and discussions. No, this isn't a discussion. This is a collision. 6 days ago, the Trump White House sent a memorandum of understanding to Ottawa. That's diplomatic language for a list of demands. But these weren't normal demands. This wasn't about adjusting the price of dairy or checking passports faster. This was a surrender document. Sources inside Washington say the demands included a total rewrite of the USMCA Energy Clause, giving the U.S. unrestricted access to Canadian hydropower and oil at below-market rates. It demanded Canada abandon its digital services tax immediately. And the final demand was the most extraordinary. Canada must align its foreign policy on China 100% with Washington's position. The threat attached to this document was blunt. If Canada didn't sign within 54 hours, Trump would impose a universal 31% tariff on every single item crossing the northern border. Cars, oil, food, everything. Now, usually this is the part where the Canadian Prime Minister flies to Washington, shakes hands, smiles for the cameras, and gives up a little sovereignty to keep the peace. That's the playbook. But Mark Carney burned the playbook. Yesterday afternoon, instead of flying to Washington, Carney held a press conference in Ottawa. He didn't look rattled. He didn't look angry. He looked like a central banker staring at a bad spreadsheet. He stepped up to the podium and didn't even address Trump by name. He simply said that Canada would not be signing the memorandum. He said that Canada's resources belong to Canadians. And then he dropped the bomb. He announced that if the U.S. applies tariffs, Canada will not just retaliate. Canada will immediately trigger Clause 17. We'll get to what that means in a moment and why it made Wall Street traders spit out their coffee. But first, understand the mood in the room. This wasn't political theater. This was a leader telling a bully, "Go ahead, try it." The reaction from Trump was instant. He took to his social media platform. He called Carney weak. He called him globalist scum. He threatened to build a wall on the northern border. He screamed about ungrateful neighbors. But here's the thing about screaming. It only works if people are still listening. And while Trump was screaming, Carney was working the phones with the European Union. He was talking to Mexico. He was talking to state governors in Michigan and New York who are terrified of losing Canadian trade. What happened yesterday wasn't just a rejection of a trade deal. It was a rejection of the idea that the United States owns Canada. It was a declaration of economic independence for the modern age. And the scariest part for Trump? He doesn't know what to do next. He has a hammer and he sees a nail, but the nail just got up and walked away. You might be thinking, okay, politicians say tough things all the time. What makes this real? Fair question. Because we have the receipts. We have the data that proves this isn't just talk. This is economic warfare, and Canada brought better weapons. Receipt number 1, the energy grid. Trump loves to talk about energy dominance. He thinks America is an island of self-sufficiency. But look at this map. New York City, Boston, the entire Northeast Corridor. A massive chunk of their electricity comes from Hydro-Quebec. It comes from the north. When Carney refused those demands, he wasn't just protecting Canadian pride. He was protecting the switch that keeps the lights on Broadway. The leaked memo implies Trump wanted to lock in low rates for that power. Carney said no. The receipt? Look at the energy futures market this morning. The price of electricity futures in the Northeast spiked 21% in 5 hours. Why? Because the market knows the truth. If Trump starts this trade war, Canada doesn't have to fire a missile. They just have to do routine maintenance on a transmission line, review export capacity, and suddenly New York goes dark. Receipt number 2, the auto sector panic. The American auto industry is not American. It is North American. A single car part crosses the US-Canada border up to 10 times before the car is finished. It is a tightly woven knot. You cannot cut it without bleeding to death. When Trump threatened that 31% tariff, he thought he was hurting Canada. But look at this letter from the governor of Michigan, which leaked last night. It doesn't say, "Good job, Mr. President." It says, quote, "If you proceed with these tariffs, 3 major assembly plants in my state will shut down within 3 days. 3 days. That is the timeline. That is the receipt. Carney knows this. He knows that Trump's base, the blue-collar workers in the Midwest, are the ones who will lose their jobs first if this supply chain breaks. Carney isn't holding a gun to Canada's head. He's pointing out that Trump is holding a gun to his own foot. Receipt number 3, the Clause 17 mystery. Everyone is searching for Clause 17 today. It is a specific, largely obscure provision in the trade agreement regarding non-market economies and strategic resource allocation. Essentially, it allows a country to pivot its critical mineral exports to other allies if national security is threatened. Carney didn't just say no. He signaled that Canada sits on some of the largest reserves of lithium, cobalt, and uranium in the world. The materials you need for missiles, for electric vehicles, for the future. By invoking this clause, he is legally preparing to redirect those assets to Europe and Japan instead of the United States. That is the ultimate receipt. He is telling the Pentagon, "You want to play games? Fine. We'll sell the batteries for your tanks to Germany." This isn't a bluff. Look at the mining stocks reacting in real time. Canadian mining firms with contracts in Europe jumped 10% this morning. The market believes Carney. They don't believe Trump. Receipt number 4, the silence of the allies. Notice who is not supporting Trump right now. The UK isn't saying a word. France is quiet. Germany is quiet. Usually allies rush to calm things down, but they are watching. They are waiting. They know that if Carney pulls this off, it breaks the spell. It proves that you can stand up to the bully and survive. The world is watching the receipts pile up on Trump's desk. And for the first time, the bill is too high for him to pay. To understand why this is happening, you have to understand Donald Trump's psychology. Not as an insult, but as strategic analysis. Trump operates on a theory of maximum pressure. He believes that if you make the threat big enough, loud enough, and scary enough, the other side will always crumble. It worked on real estate contractors in the 1980s. It worked on weak Republican senators. It worked on countries that had no other options. But here is why he is losing control of this situation. He is predictable. Carney knows exactly what Trump is going to do before he does it. It's like playing chess against someone who only knows how to move the queen. Aggressive, sure. But once you trap the queen, the game is over. Trump's leverage is also far weaker than it appears. He thinks the US economy is the only game in town. 14 years ago, that may have been largely true. But today, Canada has free trade agreements with the European Union. Canada has the CPTPP deal with Asia. Canada is the only G7 nation with free trade access to every other G7 nation. Carney has spent his entire career building those bridges. He didn't build them for fun. He built them for exactly this moment. Trump is shouting into a megaphone, thinking he's terrifying the Canadians, but the Canadians are quietly putting on noise-canceling headphones and turning toward Brussels, toward Tokyo. The panic inside the White House is visible. Watch the posts, they're getting increasingly erratic. First it was tariffs, then closing the border, then sanctions. When a leader changes the threat 6 times in 8 hours, that is not strength. That is a man realizing that the steering wheel isn't connected to the tires anymore. He is also losing control of his own party. Senators from border states are fielding panicked calls from farmers who sell corn to Canada, from businesses that need Canadian lumber. They are telling Trump to stop. He is going to hurt them. Trump hates being told to stop. So he doubles down, screams louder. But the louder he gets, the more isolated he looks. Fear is a currency. And right now, thanks to relentless chaos, the value of Trump's fear is crashing. People aren't scared of his posts anymore. They're exhausted by them. Carney is betting on that exhaustion. He is betting that if he stands still, Trump will tire himself out. It's the strategy of the matador. You don't fight the bull. You let the bull run past you. And right now, Trump is charging full speed at a red flag, not realizing there is a cliff right behind it. Now let's talk about Mark Carney himself. This isn't about worshiping politicians. Politicians are employees, they work for us. But you have to respect competence when you see it. Previous Canadian prime ministers tried to be Trump's friend. They tried to charm him, play nice, be the good neighbor. Justin Trudeau tried kindness, then tried cool detachment. It worked for a while until it didn't. Carney is doing something completely different. He isn't playing politics. He is playing economics. Mark Carney is the former governor of the Bank of England and the former governor of the Bank of Canada. He understands the global financial plumbing better than almost anyone alive. He knows where the money flows. He knows where the vulnerabilities are buried in the bond markets. When he looks at Trump, he doesn't see a monster. He sees a distressed asset. He sees a volatility risk. His move is different because it is systemic. He isn't just rejecting a trade deal. He is activating a network. Notice his language. He doesn't use words like unfair or insulting. He uses words like stability, certainty, rule of law. Why? Because those are the words that Wall Street loves. Those are the words that CEOs respond to. By framing himself as the responsible adult in the room, he is making Trump look like the risk. He is effectively saying to the world's investors, if you put your money in America, it might get wiped out by a post at 3 a.m. If you put your money in Canada, it is safe. We follow the rules. He is weaponizing boredom. He is making Canada the safe haven in a world set on fire. Carney thinks in 10-year bond yields. Trump thinks in 2 4-hour news cycles. And the genius of this move is its quietness. It doesn't require rallies. It doesn't require red hats. It just requires competence. He is building a coalition, signaling to Europe that Canada stands with them, signaling to American governors that Canada is their friend, that their president is the problem. It is a wedge strategy. He is driving a wedge between Donald Trump and the United States of America, betting that America is bigger than one man and that Canada can outlast the turbulence. It is risky, incredibly risky. If Trump actually imposes those 31% tariffs, Canada will hurt. Prices will rise in Toronto and Vancouver. Real people will suffer. Carney knows this. But he also knows that submission is worse, that if he gives in now, Trump will come back for more next month. He has decided that the cost of fighting is high, but the cost of surrendering is infinite. That is the difference between a politician and a leader. So why should you care? Maybe you live in Ohio or Texas, Alberta, or London. This is why this standoff matters to your life directly. First, prices. If that border thickens, if those tariffs hit, your grocery bill changes overnight, not by cents, by dollars. Fresh produce, cars, appliances, building materials. Inflation was already hurting you. This could turn inflation into a crisis. Second, jobs. We are talking about millions of jobs on both sides of the border that depend on the smooth flow of goods. If you work in manufacturing, logistics, or retail, you are on the front lines of this war. Third, and most profoundly, trust. For decades, Canada was the boring, reliable neighbor. If the US loses Canada, it is truly alone. Imagine the United States needing to negotiate with Canada as if it were a hostile power. Imagine Canadian oil being sold to Chinese refineries instead of Texas ones. That makes America weaker, poorer, and the world more dangerous. Carney's refusal is a mirror. He is holding it up to America and saying, look at what you've become. Is this what you want? If you are American, your president is gambling with your economic security to score political points, treating your closest ally like an enemy and driving them into the arms of rivals. If you are Canadian, this is your moment of truth. This is the moment you find out whether your country is a sovereign nation or a vassal state. Carney has placed the bet. Now comes the spin of the wheel. There was a moment yesterday that captured everything. It wasn't the speech. It wasn't the post. It was a photograph taken at the Peace Bridge between Buffalo and Fort Erie. The driver is American. The gate is Canadian. And for the first time in that driver's career, the gate was down, just for a routine check, they said. But the line of trucks behind him stretched for 7 miles. That image is the future if this isn't resolved. So what happens next? Let's play out the scenarios. Scenario A is the Trump fold, the most likely outcome, though he will never call it that. Trump sees the stock market dropping. He sees his donors screaming. He announces a great victory, claims Canada agreed to some minor concession they actually agreed to 5 years ago, drops the tariff threat, declares mission accomplished, and moves on. Carney stays silent, nods, and keeps preparing for the next round. Scenario B is the escalation. Trump's ego takes over. He imposes the full 31%. Canada retaliates immediately. The border grinds to a halt. The U.S. economy tips toward recession. Inflation spikes. Republicans panic and try to rein him in, but the damage is done. This is the scorched earth scenario. Scenario C is the breakaway, the most fascinating possibility. The tariffs stay, but at reduced levels. Canada accelerates its pivot toward Europe and Asia. Over the next several years, the North American economy slowly decouples. The U.S. becomes more isolated. Canada becomes a transatlantic power, closer in alignment to London and Berlin than to Washington. A permanent, quiet drift. Carney is preparing for Scenario C. He hopes for Scenario A. He is ready for Scenario B. Donald Trump thought he could bully reality. He thought he could force Canada to bend the knee just by raising his voice. But Mark Carney just reminded him of a very old, very simple rule of power. You are only as strong as your options. And right now, Canada has options while America is running out of them. This isn't just a story about trade. It's a story about dignity. It's a story about what happens when you push a friend too far. Carney didn't raise his voice. He raised the cost of ignoring Canada. And now Trump has to decide. Does he want a trade war he might lose, or a peace he can't brag about? I want to know what you think. Is Carney playing a genius hand, or is he poking a bear that will maul the Canadian economy? Is Trump projecting strength, or is he being exposed as weak? Drop your take in the comments below. I read every single one. Now, let me expand on what this really means for the future of North America and why the outcome of this standoff will ripple far beyond any single trade agreement or tariff dispute. What we're witnessing between Trump and Carney is a collision of two fundamentally different theories of power in the modern world. Trump's theory is transactional and coercive. Power flows from the credible threat of harm. If you can hurt someone badly enough, they will do what you say. This worked brilliantly in an era when the United States was truly indispensable, when there were no realistic alternatives to American markets, American capital, or American security guarantees. But we are no longer in that era. The globalization that America championed over the past several decades inadvertently created the very conditions that now limit American leverage. By integrating the global economy, by expanding trade networks, by building institutions that connected countries across regions, the United States helped create a world where dependency on any single power, including America, gradually decreased. Canada is a perfect illustration of this. The free trade agreements Carney has spent his career cultivating weren't built as weapons against the United States. They were built as prudent risk management by a middle power that understood it would always be vulnerable to its giant neighbor. The CPTPP, the CETA agreement with Europe, the bilateral deals with Asian partners. Each one represents an alternative relationship, an alternative market, an alternative source of capital that reduces Canada's dependence on any single trade partner, including the United States. Trump's mistake is treating this as a recent development, as if Carney invented these alternatives overnight in response to his pressure. In reality, these networks were decades in the making. They are the product of sustained diplomatic investment by successive Canadian governments across party lines. The fact that Carney, with his specific expertise in global finance, now heads a government with these networks already in place is a coincidence of history. But it is an extraordinarily consequential one. The energy dimension deserves particular emphasis because it exposes the most dangerous misconception in American energy policy thinking. The narrative of energy dominance that has been central to Trump's political brand implies that the United States is a net exporter of energy that holds leverage over energy importing countries. This is partially true in some respects. The U.S. is a significant oil and gas producer, but it completely ignores the deeply integrated nature of North American energy infrastructure. The northeastern United States is not an energy island. It is connected to Canadian hydroelectric capacity through a web of transmission infrastructure that was built over decades precisely because it was economically rational. Canadian hydropower is reliable, relatively clean, and competitively priced. Replacing that infrastructure, building alternative generation capacity, rerouting supply chains. These are not quick fixes. They take years and billions of dollars. When Carney signaled Canada's willingness to review energy export arrangements, he wasn't making an empty threat. He was pointing to a genuine vulnerability that has no quick solution. American policymakers in states like New York, Vermont, and Maine understand this vulnerability intimately, which is why their governors are so alarmed by the Trump administration's approach. The critical minerals dimension is equally significant, and perhaps even more so for long-term American strategic interests. The United States has identified critical minerals, lithium, cobalt, nickel, uranium, and others, as essential for both clean energy transition and national security. These minerals are needed for electric vehicle batteries, for advanced weapons systems, for semiconductor manufacturing, for virtually every technology that will define economic and military power in the coming decades. Canada has enormous deposits of these minerals. The United States has been counting on access to Canadian critical minerals as a cornerstone of its strategy to reduce dependence on Chinese supply chains for these materials. The entire logic of American industrial policy around critical minerals assumes Canadian cooperation. By invoking Clause 17 and signaling Canada's willingness to redirect critical mineral exports to European and Asian partners, Carney is threatening to collapse one of the foundational assumptions of American strategic planning. He is telling Washington that the alternative to Canadian supply chains for critical minerals is not American domestic production, which doesn't exist at sufficient scale, but Chinese and other foreign sources that the United States has been desperately trying to reduce dependence on. This is checkmate-level strategic thinking. Carney isn't just protecting Canada's short-term economic interests. He is leveraging America's own strategic vulnerabilities against it. And because these vulnerabilities are real and well understood within the American national security establishment, the pressure on the Trump administration from within its own government will be intense. The silence of America's other allies, Britain, France, Germany, is also deeply significant and deserves more attention than it typically receives. These countries are not silent because they don't care. They are silent because they are watching to see whether Canada's approach works. If Carney successfully stands firm and forces Trump to back down or offer genuinely better terms, it will establish a template. It will prove that the optimal strategy for dealing with Trump's maximum pressure tactics is not accommodation, but confident, well-prepared resistance. This matters enormously for European security decisions, for NATO discussions about defense spending and burden sharing, for negotiations about trade and technology cooperation. If Canada wins this confrontation, European leaders will take note and apply similar strategies in their own dealings with Washington. Conversely, if Canada ultimately folds, if economic pressure proves too severe and Carney is forced to accept terms close to Trump's original demands, it will send exactly the opposite message. It will validate Trump's approach and encourage him to apply similar pressure to other allies. The stakes, therefore, extend far beyond Canada. This confrontation is a test case for the entire question of how America's allies respond to a version of American leadership that prioritizes extraction over partnership, coercion over cooperation. The outcome will shape the strategic calculus of governments from Tokyo to Warsaw. The three scenarios I outlined, the Trump fold, the escalation, and the permanent breakaway, are not equally likely, but they are all genuinely possible. What makes this moment so consequential is that the outcome depends not just on economic calculations, but on ego, on domestic political pressure, and on the kind of unpredictable human factors that make geopolitics so difficult to forecast. What is certain is that regardless of how this particular confrontation resolves, the relationship between Canada and the United States has already changed. The trust and predictability that made the relationship so economically productive for both sides has been damaged. Canadian businesses will accelerate their diversification away from American markets. Canadian policymakers will be more skeptical of American commitments and more eager to build alternatives. Even if Trump folds tomorrow, even if normal trade relations resume, the lesson Canada has learned, that American guarantees are contingent on political whims, will shape Canadian strategy for decades. That is the deeper cost of Trump's approach that his administration seems not to understand. Every time it treats an ally as an adversary to be coerced rather than a partner to be engaged, it accelerates the very diversification away from American-centered networks that reduces American influence. The goal of maintaining American primacy is being undermined by the methods being used to assert it. Mark Carney understands this dynamic better than almost anyone. His background in central banking taught him that credibility is an asset that accumulates slowly and dissipates quickly. The same is true of geopolitical relationships. The trust built over 67 years of US-Canada cooperation cannot be replaced by tweets and threats, but it can be destroyed by them. Whether Canada emerges from this confrontation stronger or weaker in the short term, Carney is positioning it for a world where American reliability is no longer assumed. That positioning will prove valuable regardless of how the immediate crisis resolves. Because even if this administration changes course, even if the next American president restores more cooperative rhetoric, Canadian policymakers will remember that this can happen again. And they will maintain the networks and the options that Carney is now activating. The gate at the Peace Bridge may open again soon, but the world on the other side of it will look different. And understanding that difference, understanding what this moment reveals about the changing architecture of North American and global power, is essential for anyone trying to make sense of where we are headed. If you want to stay ahead of these developments, make sure you're subscribed to Newsic's Brief and turn on notifications. This story is moving fast, and the next update could change everything. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. Is Carney playing a genius hand? Or is this a gamble that could hurt ordinary Canadians most? Let's hear it.